When it comes to choosing the right camera for your needs, it can be tough to decide between two popular options, like the Canon 5D Mark IV and the Canon EOS R6. Both cameras have their own unique features and capabilities, and understanding the true differences between them can help you make an informed decision. Now, I own both of these cameras, and I use them for different purposes. The Canon 5D Mark IV is my primary photo camera, and I use it mostly for wedding photography. The R6 I generally use for CK Productions videos. As you may know by now, my original channel I started on YouTube. And I use it as my second camera for wedding photography. And having both over the past year, I've definitely got to know their strengths and let's say their quirks too. Now, when you're deciding between these two cameras, the bigger picture is that you are deciding between two different sensors, the RF and the EF, 5D being EF and R6 being RF. Both are full frame, but the RF is a much newer sensor, and it only takes RF lenses unless you have an adapter like I do. EF mounts have been around forever now, and there are a ton of different options to choose from. For the R6's RF sensor, it's a mouthful right there, it's really only the new Canon RF lenses that are available for that right now, and they come at a hefty price point. So quick correction here. While editing this video, I actually found out that there are cheaper alternatives made by Canon and made by some third-party companies as well. And now based off of that alone, it may seem clearly that the 5D's EF mount is clearly the way to go. But in reality, you're actually choosing between the past and the future. I know it sounds a bit drastic putting it in those words, but it's actually true. Canon has discontinued the EF mount in favor of the RF mount going forward. And it's a move that's putting people like myself in a bind. I have mostly EF lenses that I've gathered over the years of filmmaking and photography. And switching completely to a set of RF lenses with all the same focal lengths would literally cost me thousands of dollars. The electronic adapter is a nice stopgap for this, but again, it's only a temporary solution. The future is definitely RF. If you don't own any lenses yet, picking up an R6 might be the more obvious choice. You may even want to consider the R5, but yet again, that all comes with a pretty high price point. If you have the budget to pick up a few RF lenses, you've future-proofed yourself for all of Canon's new technology coming out for the next decade or so. Now, physically, there are some major differences between these two cameras. Obviously, the R6 is lighter, and since there's no mirror, it's smaller. The 5D is a traditional DSLR format. Another obvious difference is the R6 has a flip-out screen to it. Both are touchscreens, but the 5D screen does not flip out. Must have gone to some anger management classes. Well, it doesn't have a flip-out screen. The 5D has a spec screen on top of it, which the R6 does not. After that, there's basically not too many ergonomic differences. Now, which is better? Well, that really comes down to preference. Those who are used to shooting with DSLRs might find the 5D more familiar and satisfying to hold, and all of its buttons are laid out similarly to its past 5D models. It's funny, when I picked up the R6 and used it for the first time, it reminded me of the days when I was using my old T4i. In all honesty, the R6 feels like a cheaper camera. However, where the R6 has a big advantage is that its touchscreen is more brighter and more vibrant. It has newer technologies, such as advanced autofocus features and an electronic shutter. And one of the coolest things about it is it has an electronic viewfinder that is more clear and a more accurate display. In fact, what you're seeing through the viewfinder is exactly how your photo or your video is going to look in the end. There is a clear old versus new difference here. That's not to say that you need all of these new features. The 5D does a fantastic job on its own. I've been using it for the past year, and I've yet to take a bad photo with it. If you want to learn more about the past year experience I had with this camera, please check out that video that I posted a few weeks ago. From my own experience, there's not really one I prefer ergonomically over the other. They just operate differently. The 5D is more traditional, gear and button focused, whereas when I was using the R6, I found myself most of the time using the touchscreen. The top screen for the 5D is a really nice feature that I like to use that I wish the R6 had. If that is something that you do want and still want to get a mirrorless camera, you're going to want to consider getting the R5. Again, both really have great strengths and a couple minor drawbacks. What's most important to you? Another key difference between these cameras is their resolution. The Canon 5D Mark IV has a higher resolution of 30.4 megapixels, while the Canon R6 has a resolution of 20.1 megapixels. That means that the Canon 5D Mark IV is truly capable of producing higher quality images with more detail. However, that doesn't mean it necessarily shoots better photos. The Canon R6's lower resolution can actually be an advantage to some photographers. It can produce photos with smaller file sizes, which makes them easier to work with in post-processing. When shooting with the 5D compared with the R6, I can tell you that the photo sizes are much bigger. I've had to invest in more hard drive space and more SD and CF cards for this camera. However, I must say, in my experience, the higher resolution out of the 5D has definitely made a difference. The ability to crop in more than you can in the R6 is huge, and it's really the ideal resolution for printing. I will, however, say that the R6 definitely holds up. There were many times when we were shooting with both cameras at a wedding, I would go and look back at the pictures and not be able to tell which camera shot which photo. And again, if resolution is something that is important to you and you want to shoot with a mirrorless camera, then you might want to consider the R5 at this point too. Maybe I should have added that camera to this video as well. In terms of video capabilities, the Canon R6 has a slight edge over the 5D Mark IV. Actually, sorry AI text generator. I'm gonna change that to a big edge. The R6 is the clear option here. It's capable of recording 4K video up to 60 frames per second. Well, the 5D Mark IV is only limited to 30 frames per second at 4K. I feel like I don't have to even say more than this. This makes the R6 a no-brainer. 4K 60 frames per second is the absolute standard right now. If you're really serious into video, getting any camera that has less than that is not worth it in 2023, period. Both cameras have the ability to shoot in C-Log, but again, the R6 gets the edge because it has C-Log built into it. You have to special order the 5D to have C-Log in it, and if you didn't get it without C-Log, you have to send it back in for them to load it on. And the R6's C-Log also boasts 10-bit color internally in the camera, whereas the 5D is only 8-bit, which may not mean a lot to some people, but it means a lot to me. It just, seriously, in my opinion, it's not really worth comparing the video between these cameras. The R6 is definitely the better option. There are a few reasons why you could get the 5D Mark IV for video. One being a B cam to go along with a better suited camera. And two, like I said in my review in my last video, if you are primarily a photographer and you want to casually do video, definitely utilize this camera. Finally, the last thing to consider is the price point of these cameras. The price point for the Canon R6. Wait, there's an R6 Mark II? What? I'll have to look into that later. Right now, both cameras are actually selling at about the same price point of $2,299. But there's a couple other things that you have to consider. If you're getting the R6, you may need to get a converter, and that can run you between $99 and $200 based on which one you get. And of course, remember the lenses. So before you make any purchases, make sure you fill up your cart with all the accessories and all the lenses you plan on getting and really see where the price point lands at that point. This is not something to really take super lightly and to take super cheaply in as well, especially if you're planning on doing this professionally. It really is an investment. So overall, the Canon 5D Mark IV and the Canon EOS R6 are both excellent cameras. Ultimately, the right camera for you will depend on your wants and needs. Okay, I've been trying this new AI script generator and I'm just not feeling it. Side note, if you want to learn more about what I think about AI art and new AI tools for filmmaking, please check out the video I made a couple weeks ago on. But anyway, here's my true conclusion. Realistically, I would say in 75–80% of the situations, you're gonna get the R6. If you're solely comparing between these two cameras. If you want a camera solely for video, R6 hands down. If you do both, still R6. Yes, you might have a drop in your resolutions for photo, but it's really not a huge noticeable difference. I met plenty of other wedding photographers that primarily use this camera. For photographers, I do believe that the 5D produces a better image. It's not by a lot, but definitely does. And it's just a very familiar, reliable option for a lot of people, honestly. It's one of the most solid, reliable, professional cameras I've ever had. And like I've said in other videos, it just works. The most important issue in all of this is the sensor. Eventually, as much as I like this camera, it's gonna be obsolete someday. Today is not that day, but it's gonna be obsolete quicker than this camera, the R6. It's just a fact. If you're upgrading from an older 5D model or own a lower level EF mount camera and have EF lenses, then yes, 5D is probably a perfect option for you. You will transition seamlessly to this camera. If you already have a lower level RF mount camera and RF lenses, there's no reason to go backwards to the 5D. You've already moved on to newer technology. The R6 is your no-brainer option. You get a small hit in the resolution, but if you want to get the larger resolution that the 5D Mark IV can push out, you might want to consider saving up to get the R5, or I guess the R6 Mark II now. That's a thing. If this is your very first camera purchase, again, R6 is the better option. And as much as I love my 5D, my advice would be to invest in the future and not the past. And if I sold all my gear and started over, that's what I would do. Actually, don't let what I just said send you into a panic or into buyer remorse. You don't have to sell all your gear and start over. We are at a special time in this industry where technology has improved so much that once you hit a certain price point, the choice of the gear really doesn't matter. It's going to get the job done. Just make sure you continue to grow your skills. If you're the one behind the camera, then either of these cameras will produce fantastic work.